Today I'm going to be sharing with you 10 mistakes people make moving to New York City, and more importantly, how to avoid them. Watch till the end. This is going to be good. This video is in collaboration with Lemonade, and we're filming in my apartment in Park Slope, Brooklyn. I think the decorations are coming together pretty well. Let's get to the list. The first mistake to avoid is picking the wrong neighborhood. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard this from people that have just moved here. I love my apartment so much, but you know, this neighborhood we live in, there's nothing to do here, or I'm always leaving the area to go somewhere else on weekends to go explore other neighborhoods that they like more. I'll tell you, when I first moved to New York City, I 100% wanted to live in Greenwich Village, even though our apartment was, not to sugarcoat it, a complete dump. I was so happy the first even 5 or 6 years out of the 9 years that we spent there living in that space, because the neighborhood meant everything to me. Living in New York City is an experience, and I think at least for your first year here, I would put your ideal neighborhood at the top of the list or near the top of the list. Even more important than having the perfect apartment that's super spacious and has amazing light, because when you are walking distance to everything that interests you, let's say a good restaurant scene, nightlife, art stuff, whatever that may be, picking the right neighborhood is crucial, I think, to having a better experience. And when you've lived in New York City a longer period of time, if you want to move to a neighborhood that's more boring, you have more space, I think that's perfectly fine as well. We did a whole video about how to pick the right neighborhood on the channel, putting a card to that above. Definitely put a lot of thought into where you live. Not introducing yourself to the neighbors. This sounds like common courtesy almost anywhere in the United States, but in big apartment buildings in New York City, you would be shocked the lengths people will go to avoid their neighbors, even making small talk. I urge you, when you move to New York, at least knock on your immediate neighbor's door just to say hi, even if you're shy or introverted. When we first moved to Manhattan almost 10 years ago, we introduced ourselves to the neighbors upstairs. Now, I'll tell you, I actually was single at the time. My brother and I thought there was 2 single girls living upstairs, so that motivated us to knock on the door. It was actually 2 dudes, but guess what? They were really cool, and we even went to some parties they threw. But more importantly, I had their number, and occasionally they'd blast music. I would just text them upstairs, hey, can you put that down? I'm hearing it coming through the ceiling, and they were super cool about it. Like, do you want your first interaction with your neighbor to be your music's too loud, knocking on their door, or something odd like that? If you ever get locked out, we had one lady in our building who knew us, so I think once or twice she was locked out. She rang our buzzer, said who she was, we quickly let her in. So many little advantages to knowing people in your building. So definitely be proactive when you move in. Say hi to at least some of your neighbors. This is a lot easier in smaller buildings, of course, but even in a big apartment building in Manhattan, definitely do this. If you're enjoying these videos about life in New York, make sure to subscribe. And now for number 3, we're gonna toss it to New York's rental expert, Cash Jordan.
What's up, John? So the best tip that I have.
You see that over there? That is the subway.
Today it's absolutely pouring out, and the further you've got to go to get to the train, the less convenient your life is going to be. And not even to mention, if you're carrying groceries or something heavy, or it's just been a long day, the last thing that you want to do is be spending your time walking the streets, because if you find yourself in that situation, you might end up spending extra money on a cab, or just not enjoying and exploring the city that you just moved to check out. Back to you, John.
I could not agree with Cash any more on that. Convenience, so important in New York City. Living a 10 or 15 minute walk from the nearest subway, in my opinion, would get old really quickly, especially when you're not relying on a car like you do in most cities. Not getting renter's insurance, and that brings us to the sponsor of today's video, Lemonade, who contacted me at the perfect time, because guess what? I actually forgot to get renter's insurance on this apartment, and I'm gonna sound like your mom here, but this is something everybody needs when they move to New York City. I've heard all sorts of horror stories from friends. Crazy things happen in New York. I don't know, a pipe bursts, somebody steals your stuff on the subway, a fire, smoke, you name it. it can possibly happen. Lemonade makes it so easy to get coverage. Just hop on your computer. Within 90 seconds, I had coverage in my new apartment in Park Slope. And policies start at just $5 a month. That's like the cost of one of the items in one of my cheap food guides. Now let me show you what's covered around my apartment. Furniture, most definitely covered. Camera gear, covered as well, even when you're not in your apartment.
Anything happens to your clothes, they've got you as well.
Watches, jewelry. What I appreciate about a company like Lemonade is their give back model. So any unused premiums go to a charity of your choice. So it's very easy to support a company like that. Lemonade pays out their claims super fast. We're all busy. I get it. I hate paperwork. Check out the link in the description to sign up for it right now. Peace of mind, so important, especially when you're moving to New York City, believe me. Renting a ground floor unit, I'm gonna get a lot of argument and debate about this. This is just my personal opinion, but I would never rent a ground floor unit in New York City, particularly in Manhattan. There could be exceptions in some of the other boroughs, but in Manhattan, let's see what you're gonna be looking at. You're gonna have bars on your window, especially if you're facing the street level. And without having the bars on your window, random people could just walk by and, peek into your apartment. So you're always gonna have the curtains down. And if you don't have bars on your window, you have the potential for burglary. If you're in the back of the building, a lot of times, guess what you're gonna be facing on the ground floor? The garbage area. I can't tell you how many apartments I've looked at ground floor where that was the situation in one of the bedrooms. You open it up and the garbage is right out there. You're also closer to the street, which means you're gonna get some of those summer smells, which we've talked about. And don't get me started on the potential for rodents being on the first floor, especially if you're anywhere near a restaurant. I will admit the great convenience of being on the ground floor is not having to lug groceries, a suitcase, or anything to and from your unit. If you disagree with me and you have had a good experience or do currently live in a ground floor unit, especially in Manhattan, I want to know why. Convince me, I'm curious. Touring an apartment virtually or having somebody else vouch an apartment without you seeing it first. Due to COVID, there were actually people who were touring apartments virtually and signing leases sight unseen, and they had no other choice, but you do have a choice right now. You can see apartments in New York City at the moment, no problem. Even if a broker is virtually gonna be showing you the place. And I've had a lot of questions about this actually. You're not gonna know what the noise levels are. They might go in the morning and there's a bar located downstairs that's gonna be blasting music, and you don't get to visually see that when you enter the building. You don't know what the hallways look like. Does the place look dirty? Does it not look like the super cares about the residents? Because I've seen a lot of apartments like that before where you walk in and you think to yourself, oh, do I really want to live here just based on the hallway situation? The other mistake you make here is trusting your potential roommate, your best friend, to look at the apartment for you. I mean, you guys could have different ideas of what makes a good apartment. Remember, this is a 1-year binding contract when you sign a lease in New York City. So unless you have extenuating circumstances, get your butt into that apartment at least once. Remember what I said about picking the wrong neighborhood? Almost as bad as picking the wrong roommate. And sometimes you're gonna need a roommate or 2 roommates to live in a neighborhood that you're really happy with at the start of your New York City experience. I avoided this issue because I lived with my twin brother, and yes, there were times we wanted to kill each other, but for the most part, we were actually pretty compatible. And I have heard horror stories about siblings living together and that not working out, so I guess I just got lucky. This isn't like your freshman year of college. You actually get to choose who your roommate is unless it's a sublet situation, but even in that case, you should talk to the potential person you're gonna be sharing a space with. All I have to say on this is sometimes your best friend is not the right person to be your roommate. You need someone that respects the space, respects you, and sometimes even having differing hours can be a blessing. There's so many bad stories about roommates in New York City, so choose wisely. Not jumping on a good listing. Because of COVID-19, there are thousands upon thousands of apartments sitting vacant right now. But there's gonna be a day again when New York gets super popular, and it's gonna be like 2019, where when you see a nice apartment, I promise you there's 2 or 3 other people who have the exact same idea. So you need to jump on good apartments immediately. And what that means is having all of your paperwork ready to go. You know, having your tax forms, your bank statements. If you have a roommate, making sure they have all of their paperwork available as well. When I was looking at apartments in Park Slope, we saw 5 or 6 in one day. I was ready to apply on the spot, all paperwork ready to go by email. Because remember, good apartments in New York are like a good boyfriend or girlfriend. They tend to go quickly, and there's not a whole lot of them available. And they also could tend to be very expensive. Never mind. Not knowing your rights as a tenant. The good news is New York City has so many protections for tenants that many people don't even realize. And it actually starts when you apply for an apartment, because about a year ago the law changed and the maximum application fee is just $20. And that's if you don't have a background check already. I had a situation during my apartment search where somebody tried charging me $120 for the application fee, and I talked about that in my latest scams video. I'm gonna put a card to that above. Did you know that landlords must paint occupied apartments in multiple dwelling buildings with 3 or more apartments every 3 years? I didn't even know that until I researched this video. I lived in the same apartment for 9 years, and that place needed a fresh coat of paint like you wouldn't believe. I wish I would have told them about that. I would have happily spent a day somewhere else for them to have repainted that apartment. Here's another good one. No deposit or advance on an apartment can exceed 1 month's rent. Landlords used to get away with murder on this. If you didn't have the right track record, if you were international, I heard stories that they would try to make you pay 3 months, 6 months, even sometimes up to a year's rent in advance. That is not legal anymore. These are all recent laws. Tenants in New York City have a whole lot of rights, and these are very important things to know when you're moving here. Forgetting about noise issues. I read a really funny comment on Facebook a couple of weeks back when it was discussing how New York City curfew was coming to an end, especially for outdoor dining. And a lady was saying, oh no, I'm gonna be hearing street noise all night now. And people went off on her saying that, oh, well, you lived through a pandemic, get used to the noise. We slept for a year, blah, blah, blah. But it actually got me thinking about New York City and, you know, how this really isn't a place for people that can't deal with some semblance of noise all the time, especially Manhattan. I know many of you watching this want to move to Manhattan. It could be from nightlife, it could be just loud people on your street, or construction. It feels like there's always some kind of construction going on, and a lot of these things don't necessarily pop up when you move in. Construction could start 1 year later, so you have to be proactive on this front. One thing that I do is when we go to sleep at night, I have a little fan and I put it on just to drown out any potentially obnoxious sounds. There's a lot of people living in a densely populated area. Coming to New York City and not preparing for all the potential noise issues that you're likely going to deal with would not be very wise. Check out our other videos about moving to New York City on this playlist. Thank you so much for watching. As always, till next time.